Please welcome to the stage, Janis Ian. And please welcome the director, Varda Barkar. Varda, I'm going to actually start with you. Can you talk about what inspired you to make this film? Had you been a big fan of Janis's work? Had you read her memoir? Like, what was it that made you think, okay, this is such a rich, layered story, I want to make this a film?
Well, I was a fan of her album Between the Lines when I was in high school. In fact, I listened to it over and over and over again. And I cried and cried and cried and felt so seen and heard by the music. It was a very important album in my teenage years. And cut to 2020, and I'd finished a film called Fandango at the Wall and thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I decided I wanted to make a film about someone with whom I closely identify. And asked myself that question, who would that be? And Janis Ian came into my mind. And yes. But I knew nothing about Janis or her music outside of that one album that was so influential. I did know Stars, I did know Aftertones, those albums, but I didn't know much else. So first I listened to all her music, and then I read her autobiography. And after I read the autobiography, I thought, oh my God, someone's got to have done a film about her. And what an incredible story and an incredible body of music. And I searched and searched, Janis Ian documentary, and I couldn't find it.
And when you called her, or I'm not sure, but when you got to the point where you called Janis and said, hey, I'd like to make this film.
So
Janis, what did you think?
the first time I got asked for somebody to do a film of my life, I was 16. So for me, this was not news. And I had just walked away from somebody at a public broadcasting station who had envisioned one film, and then after I signed, it became a different film. And I waited that out, and I thought, well, this is the universe saying to me, don't do this. So then Varda emailed me, because I'm stupendously easy to get to via my website. And she emailed, and she said, I'd love to make a film about you. And I said, no. And then you got my number. I don't know how you did that, or I gave it to you.
Mary, it was through, I sent a bunch of my work to you via
A third party.
a third party, exactly.
Right.
And then I guess you had seen the films. I think it was Big Voice since your father.
Yeah, and I was still saying no. And she said, here's my idea. And I said, no, let me tell you my idea. And I told her that I didn't want the film to be just about me and my fabulousness. I wanted it to be about the times that I came up in and the times that brought the songs about, and I wanted a lot of archival footage that wasn't of me, but the times. And that was exactly what she'd been thinking.
Exactly.
So we began with that resonating. I watched her work. I talked to a bunch of friends in the film industry who vetted her out and said, yeah, she's actually real. And then my lawyer had her do a 20-minute, what do you call it?
Well, I would say 1 year, but yeah.
Yeah. To me, it took 20 minutes. But she did like an example of what she was thinking, and it was right. And so I said, okay.
The 20-minute piece, yes. We did a
how
proof of
quickly they
concept.
forget. And so we embarked, and she started raising funds. You know, it's a documentary, so there's no funding. Individuals funded, and then several really rainmaker people came in and funded. And she started, and it was right at COVID. It was right at the point of COVID where we didn't know anything except that my age group were dying. And Varda said, I'll come meet you. And I said, no. And she said, well, I'll wear a hazmat suit. And I said, no, you're not getting anywhere near me. But then my entire contribution to the film, I sent her all of the stills that I had, She did 2 interviews with me. I did 1 interview with James Reed. And then the only thing that I asked for, that I remember, was the right to request a factual correction, if there was anything. And there was one factual correction where Brooks Arthur had gotten a date wrong. And I didn't want him to go down in music history remembering the wrong date. So that was taken out.
Yeah.
That was it. The rest of the film is you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was amazing. Actually, on that note, I want to recognize that Bill Prady is here, who supported our film.
And Ann Evans.
Ann Evans is here, who supported our film. And our DP, Matthew Wilder, is here.
Hi, Matt.
And stand up, you guys. Ryan Larkin, who's our editor, is here. Robert Stronger did our sound mixer. Paloma Bennett, who is our archival producer. You guys stand up.
Come on, stand up. Nobody's ever
You're all
going to clap
here.
for you
And
otherwise.
Patrick Bennett, who's my husband, who's been an incredible supporter, is here. Alessandra Pasquino, who's an incredible producer and made it all happen, is here. And Deborah.
Okay, let's stop now.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to recognize you all, and this is a wonderful night to celebrate this incredible crew who was able to come because we did this in Los Angeles. I want to thank you all.
Because oddly enough, a documentary looks like just one person with a handheld camera makes it. But it actually takes like 400 people. It's true.
Yeah. I wanted to say, watching this film, I've seen it twice now, but even as a young teenager, you have incredible poise. And chutzpah too. Like, I just think when you light, Shadow Morton's newspaper on fire.
Yeah.
When he leaves you in the recording studio the first time with seasoned musicians and just basically turns it over to you.
I know, and I asked him the last time I saw him shortly before he died, I said, why did you do that? I mean, I'm 15 years old. I'm in the studio with people like Artie Butler, who are already legendary, who is here tonight, in fact, and are already legendary. And you just kind of dumped me there, and you go into the control room with Brooks, who was the engineer on Society's Child. And Shadow looked at me and he said, I knew. That was all he said. I mean, I think some people just have that instinct of what to do at that moment, and I've been fortunate to be around a lot of those people.
And was the scene in Greenwich Village, again, your family, you moved from the chicken farm in New Jersey to Manhattan. You're going out to the Greenwich Village, and you're basically getting these master classes. Did it feel safe? From this distance, there was part of me that's like, oh my God. And I wondered, was there anybody who was mentoring you?
No, it was a different time in New York. My friend Janie and I, we were 13, 14. We would ride the subway 2 a.m. We would come home with our guitars. We would go to Greenwich Village every Sunday. There was a whole passel of people from camp and stuff who would meet at the Washington Square Fountain, and we would sing. It never occurred to us that it wasn't safe. And I had mentors. I mean, Odetta mentored me, Van Ronk mentored me, but the best mentoring you get in my business is being on the road and being in the studio, and people like Artie Butler and Artie Kaplan teaching me how to write a lead sheet. Because I walked in and I thought it was like folk singing. You sang the song a few times, everybody learned it, and then they played it. It was very simple. But in fact, you have to actually know how to write a chart and talk to musicians, which is a different language, and all of that stuff. So I learned on the fly. And I was very lucky that I think I was so young and clearly so naive that I skipped over whole bunches of stuff that somebody older would have had to deal with, because it was clear that I was enormously talented, and I say that in all humility. I was enormously talented, I was enormously hungry, I was enormously willing to learn, and I was very respectful. And all of those things helped.
And throughout that period, are your parents, they've clearly, gotten a loan and they've gotten you the guitar, so they clearly recognize, okay, there's a gift here.
They were just trying to keep up.
Yeah. How did they feel about it? It was less.
I'm serious. They were trying to keep up.
Yeah.
It's like my friend Janie says, it's sometimes hard to keep up with an artist when we're being an artist. Part of your job is just zoom, and whatever's in your way either gets mowed down or you go around it, you go under it or over it, but you do what you're doing. I asked my mom years later, and she said it was so clear that I was going to do that regardless, that they figured they better support me in it, because otherwise I would just leave and go do it on my own.
And when you were working on that scene, did you have, sounded like you had some sort of archive, but did you have much to work with in terms of photographs and other material from that time period?
Well, we had a good amount of photographs that Peter Cunningham took, and another photographer, Life magazine photographer, Douglas Gilbert, and some others. But I actually asked Janis, do you have any footage from your childhood or footage, through the years, behind the scenes stuff? And there was
And I
none.
said there was no way my family could have afforded a Super 8.
Exactly.
We had nothing, so she had to
Yeah.
recreate it.
Yeah, so we had, as I mentioned, Paloma Bennett did a lot of searching and found incredible archival imagery, right from the beginning. So she put months into it.
And they built costumes, like my dad's clothing looks like my dad's clothing.
But then we also created what I called mood shots, because it's sort of like these fragments of memories that are my imaginings of Janis's memories that kind of suggest and give more of a visual storytelling aspect to the film.
One of the highlights for me is you on the Leonard Bernstein show. Can you talk about that show? Was that a show that you had watched? Clearly, he's a huge
My parents
figure.
were huge fans, and
Yeah.
so we watched every Sunday when he did the master classes and the orchestral classes. But I didn't, I was 14 and a half. It doesn't strike you that it's a big deal. You're like, okay, Odetta is a big deal, but Leonard Bernstein, that's kind of my parents' people. And so, so when it came up in a very, pardon this word, it's a very organic way. Robert Shelton, the music critic of the New York Times, had been at the Gaslight Cafe when Reverend Gary was playing and I was opening. He heard Society's Child. He found out there was a record. He gave it to David Oppenheim, who we later learned was the love of Bernstein's life, but also his producer. David gave it to Bernstein, who said, "This is great. Let's devote a quarter of an hour to her." It's like, and I said, okay. And my parents were like, wow. And my grandparents were, can you afford college now? And all I remember from it is that he was so gracious. He clearly knew how to deal with somebody young and talented, because that's what he'd been doing at Tanglewood. And his wife, Felicia, helped me with my Spanish homework because I was failing abysmally, and I had a test the next day. But that's my memory of the day.
Well, and
So it's
clearly
not
he
terribly
admired your
profound.
songwriting as well, because he breaks
He
it
did.
down
He
and talks
followed
about
me the
that.
rest
Yeah.
of my career, which is very nice. And after he died, they found a copy of my poetry book among his stuff, which was pretty cool. Yeah.
And also, too, I wanted to ask you just about your relationship with producer Brooks Arthur, because it seemed like he was such a good match. He had such deep respect for you that it was sort of this perfect person to work with at that
Yeah.
time in your life. Can you talk about that relationship?
Brooks had been the engineer on Society's Child. And it was, like Varda points out in the film, it was time for Brooks to move into production. And I couldn't get arrested. I mean, nobody wanted me as a songwriter. Frank Lesser gave me a shot. That was it. Nobody wanted me as a singer. Nobody wanted me as a player. I was out here in LA scuffling, writing lead sheets for other people to make a living and singing commercials for the Sands Hotel. And Brooks and I met at Janie and Dennis's then house. And Brooks agreed that he would take it on. After hearing 3 or 4 songs, he heard Jessie and Thank Yous and maybe Stars. And it's pretty much exactly as he says in the film. I mean, he took a chance on me. All of these musicians would do things like stay a little bit longer than they were supposed to because they knew that we had a tight budget, but they'd give me an extra 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Everybody came together, and it was kind of perfect timing all around. I really got lucky. I mean, so much of this business is just being in the right place at the right time, and then you have the stuff to follow it up. If you don't have the stuff, it goes nowhere. But if you're lucky enough to be with the right people at the right time, miracles happen.
Maybe they stayed because it was that magical. It was like it was such a beautiful experience.
I think so. I remember in one session, I had written the score for Applause. I had never scored before, and I didn't know you could buy a score. So I bought a record called Instruments of the Orchestra, and I bought Stravinsky's Rite of Spring and West Side Story, and I scored them. I sat there with a score paper, and I literally scored them. And I taught myself to score that way. And so I scored this song Applause because I heard it in my head. And then we got to the studio, and it was on the first album, and there were all these string players, and string players are notorious for being annoying. And then there were all these horn players who are notorious for playing cards all the time. And they were completely ignoring me. I mean, I was 20, 21, 22. And Richard Davis, the bass player, came in fresh from his gig at a Philharmonic rehearsal, still wearing his full stage clothes, his tux. And he walked up to the bass and he banged on it with his stick, with his bow. And he said, "Gentlemen, let's listen to what the lady has to say." And that was it. It was the kiss of God. And Richard got the entire group to listen to me and play the song. And stuff like that just kept happening. So it was meant to be.
But it's clear too, like from a young age, like you are diligent, you're hardworking, like you're working on your writing all the time.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you would pursue it, like what that work process looked like, and maybe also too just how it changed over the years?
So I think I was lucky in my generation that most albums didn't come with the lyrics. So what you had to do if you wanted to learn the lyric was to write it out as you listened. And there's very little better if you're going to be a writer than writing great other writers. So I would write out Dylan, I would write out Paxton, I would write out Oakes, I would write out Buffy St. Marie. And I learned as I went what to do and what not to do. I think a certain amount of that is just sheer talent. You're born with that. I don't know how I knew to lift the chorus in Hair of Spun Gold, my first song, when I was 12, or how I knew to lift it in Society's Child. Those are basic songwriting things nobody taught me. But I also was exposed to great songwriters all my life, and I was exposed to great music, and I hungered for it. And I wanted to be a Beatle. I really did, like I say in the film. I mean, I wanted to be famous. I wanted people to chase me down the street and want my autograph. That was the goal. And then when I was 16, two things happened. I played the Berkeley Folk Festival where I met Joplin. And I don't know, this sounds so stupid. I looked out and there were about 1,000 students and they were listening. They were hanging on every word. And I suddenly felt this huge weight, because they thought I knew something. Up until then, I had just been writing. I just thought, oh, this is cool, I'll write a song. But suddenly, they were really listening. And about the same time, somebody gave me a book of poems by Rainer Maria Rilke. And at the opening of the book, it said, "I don't want to be a poet. I want to change your life." And that changed my life, because I suddenly had a goal. Up until then, it had just been, okay, everybody says, do this, do that, you'll be famous. But at that moment, I wanted to write universal songs that would change people's lives for the better. And that became a lodestone. So Stars came out of that, Jessie came out of that, 17, Resist. They all came out of those two Rilke lines.
And when you did get that fame, I mean, the film suggests it was actually made your life difficult at school. Or was
well,
it
I
just
mean,
the
you have to be
teachers at
fair.
school
I
made
hated
it-
school,
Yeah.
so you have to be fair. Yes, the teacher. I was going to High School of Music and Art, and I was again very naive, and I thought that because it was a music and art school, I would be welcomed by the teachers with open arms. It had never occurred to me that somebody would be envious. I mean, I was 14, 15. Who is envious of a 15-year-old? And they were. It was unfortunate. But it was good in that the day I turned 16, I was out that door and gone.
And your parents, again, were like, okay, you're off on this path.
And my parents were in the middle of a divorce. There wasn't anything, they had other things on their minds.
For you, what did you discover as you made this film about Janis?
Well, the whole film, I mean, ironically, after I finished the book and when I realized, that I could go ahead and move forward with the film, I was a little concerned because it was set in the past. I'd never made a film set in the past before. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I know the story. Because normally, when you're doing a film in the present, you have some idea, but you're constantly discovering things. And I thought, how am I going to make this fresh if I already know it? But then every moment truly was a discovery. speaking with all the different people, I learned about, like, I didn't know about some people's lives, and you know, the Mary story, and a lot of the relationships and the details. And you know, when Brooks talks about, you know, how they were taking off the emotional aspect of it, and the interconnectedness, and you know, all these extraordinary people who were in Janis's life who got to, you know, contribute their part and help build the story. So it was all a process of discovery. But if I had to distill it to my own, in terms of my personal experience, I would say empowerment. I am a much stronger human being having told Janis's story and learned from her, you know, that it's okay to speak your mind. It's okay to say what you believe.
The other half of that is, I'm very big on artists controlling their work and their careers. I know there are certain artists who just want to be artists, and yay for you and good luck with that. But to me, having been burned a couple of times, I'm very diligent about reading contracts and negotiating. I do a lot of my own negotiating with companies like Audible.com. And part of it is because they're so scared of negotiating with an artist that it actually gives me some power. Part of it is also that I know what I want. I don't want a huge advance. I want control over my work. So a lot of our discussions on the side of the film were about negotiating and standing up for yourself and not being afraid to say no. Because what are they going to do? I mean, once you know what your line is, who cares? If you turn around and say no and they go, okay, then we won't do it. Fine. I'm 74. I don't care. And there's a huge strength to that. And there's a defending of your own work that was already there in you. I mean, people like Varda and me, we're pushovers a lot of the time. We'll do pretty much anything somebody tells us to do until you screw with our work. And then the gauntlet is drawn, and we stand there and we'll kill. It's like Stella Adler, my mentor. She once said, and if they're on stage and they can't hold their own, kill them. Because they're taking up air that other people need to breathe. And while I know that sounds harsh, it's extremely empowering because it gives you the right to insist that the people you work with be on your level, or at least be attempting to be on your level. And if you're going to set your bar high, then why not? Why not insist that you be surrounded by other people with that high a bar?
But I think also that artists, when we're collaborating, you know, other artists, they like that. I mean, that's the most exciting thing when you're aspiring to something really great, when you're really pushing it as far as you can. That's when it's the most fun and joyous, because that's the most alive you can be, is when you're really, really aspiring to create something great.
Yeah, the act of creation. That's as close to God as you're going to get.
But Janis, I don't think you needed Stella Adler to tell you. I think you knew that when you were 14.
But Stella Adler gave me a voice and a vocabulary for things that I knew I felt but didn't know how to express. And then sent me out to teach and give master classes. So she also changed my trajectory completely. I mean, yes, when I was 14, 15, I said no to changing the lyric because I couldn't imagine Baez or Dylan changing a lyric because somebody said, you'll have a hit record. Having a hit record didn't mean anything to me. I didn't understand what that was because that was pop music. That was a little embarrassing in my world, you know? Just like, you had a pop hit, really? I mean, we were folk singers. We were on the side of righteousness.
You clearly, like, being a performer was such an important part of your life. I'm curious for songs like Stars, From Me to You, Fly Too High, 17. How do those change in meaning for you over time as a performer? And do you then interpret them in different ways?
That's a good question.
Well, first of all, I really hate it when singers have a hit record and then change everything. Because I feel like the audience, I don't have an obligation to the audience when I'm writing, but I do when I'm performing. Because they're paying. They're paying to see and hear that song and to be made to feel something. Like, again, quoting Stella, the audience doesn't care what I feel, they care what I make them feel. So I wouldn't change at 17. How did they change for me? They don't really, because I don't think about it that much. I don't I'm not fascinated by my old work. I'm fascinated by my new work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no. I was going to say something about that, yeah.
But I expressed it first, so.
You said it. I just have to think it, and then you say it.
That's right. It's the grand falloon.
You know, a project like this is this rare opportunity for somebody to look back on their life and their work. How has that process been for you? Like, to look at this film, to watch it, to see your life unfold as it's been interpreted here. What have you discovered?
Surreal.
Yeah.
Surreal. Just strange to see yourself over the years. I had already written my autobiography, and that had already been out, and I'd done the Audible book, which won the Grammy. So I had already, it's going to sound absurd, I had already researched my life because I was very paranoid that I was going to get a date wrong. And I was going to say, oh, I was with Jimi Hendrix on this night when he was actually in L.A., and I was in New York. So I'd gone through that process. Seeing it as a whole is surreal and wonderful because the songs then take on a different meaning for me. And I realize that there's a different audience for them now. But then again, I think like most artists, like Varda's already thinking about her next project. You know, I'm already thinking about my next project. This is then, not now. So it's in the past. It's a bit like being asked how I want to be remembered, you know, and I get that question a lot since I hit my 70s. And I usually say, pardon my language, I don't give a flying fuck, I'll be dead. Right?
But one thing that
This is going to archives.
Yeah, it is. But that's what I was going to say. I mean, one thing that I feel is important about this film is that it is a record. It is a historical record too. You know, it's capturing Janis' story and the time she lived in a certain place and a time, and it's now forever will be referenced.
Yeah, I think especially for niche communities like the gay community, or the Jewish community, the Rom community, the various communities that were destroyed in the Holocaust. This is a way to explain to my granddaughters what happened in a very visceral way. And they wouldn't have understood the Matthew Shepard reference, for instance, or how when I say every gay person in the world flinched. But this makes it understandable. And that's one of the wonderful things about film, is that because it's visual and sonic, it goes into you in a different way.
All right, we're at 10 o'clock, and I want to give these fine people an opportunity to ask questions. So if we can bring the lights up a little bit. All right, who's got a question?
Wow, right back
Let's
there.
start right here.
Okay, fine.
Who's going? Did you pick something?
I just saw somebody toward the back there. Yes, Stephen. Going home, sitting. I have a couple of books I want to finish that I've been messing with, and we had a terrible hurricane come through the island where I live a couple of years ago, last year, and destroyed everything I was working on currently. So rebuilding that, and then working on these books, and trying to be in one place long enough to actually finish them, and find out whether I can write prose. I'll never be as good a prose writer as I am songwriter, because I have 60 years as a songwriter, 62 years. But finding out whether I can write prose that moves people the way that songs do. Hopefully.
Does it give you, writing prose, does it give you a similar charge as when you...
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's all writing.
Awesome. Yeah. I have a friend here, Denise. I'm going to take her question next.
How is your voice now? It's okay. I can't hold my notes. You know, I can't trust it. I can do a couple of lines. Maybe I could do a chorus. I sang a little bit of backup for a friend carefully. It's got a much bigger vibrato because of the scarring on one side. So I told Baez I kind of sound like early you, but alto. It's okay. My speaking voice is pretty good. It tires more quickly than it used to. I get hoarse more quickly than I used to. But I've learned to talk over it, to talk up rather than talking down. And that helps. It'll just, you know, I had a choice. I mean, they could have done cortisone shots, and we could have tried that. We could have tried surgeries. And I asked the speech pathologist if I would ever sound like myself, and when she said no, I said, that's it. Then one of the most miserable months I've ever spent. You know, and you don't get over something like that. You don't even come to terms with it, I think. You just live with it, because what else are you going to do?
All right, yes, you? Yeah, you.
What's next for the film, Janis?
Trying to raise enough money for an Academy Award. You know, we need. I mean, it's been. In my naivete, I thought it was like the Grammys and anybody could enter, but apparently you have to first you have to submit, and they have to agree that you can submit for the award.
Which we've done.
Which we did, and Varda got placed, and they agreed that it could be in the running, but then you have to mount the campaign, and I don't know what that is, but I do know that it costs $100,000 to start. And for a documentary about a singer-songwriter, it's pretty, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hope, you know? We hope.
All right.
Redhead.
Redhead, yes.
Cat.
Say congratulations, and Varda knows this. This is the best biodoc I've ever seen. I've seen.
Way to go, Varda.
Thank you.
Way to go.
All right.
Thank you.
Another redhead? Yeah.
This was just brilliant, and for those of us, many of us here who came up during the 60s and 70s, I have a lot of concerns about younger people now, because we're seeing a lot of the same things that some of us went through. How can you see this film reaching out? And I'm a retired professor, so like universities, colleges, and so on. I think that's one way to really reach people and encourage them to be creative. I think that's the hard part. People are afraid to express themselves.
I don't know that people are afraid so much as they're not used to it. Because when I was coming up, when you were coming up, we were used to it. I came out of the HUAC years. I watched Pete Seeger stand up, and they haven't had to see that for a long time. So this is a brand new concept for a lot of younger people. But we do what we can with the film. You know, I don't know.
No, we want to. I mean, I do think there's a fear due to cancel culture on the one side, and now another aspect kind of a cancel culture that's going on now. There's so much pressure to have people say the things that they should be saying as opposed to what they really believe. So I do feel it's a really, really important aspect of the film, that it shows you can speak your mind, and it's not going to kill you. And if everyone doesn't like you, well, then that's okay. You know, you just have to stay true to who you are.
But the reality is that sometimes it does kill you.
That's true too. You're
And
right.
and I think that's what a lot of kids are grappling with, because it's not just the pressure from the other kids. It's like Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. I mean, that's who I was looking at, and I don't want to be dead.
That's true. But you did keep going. You went back on the stage.
Yeah, I did go back on the stage because I'm an artist, and that's my job. But I think that I don't think we give enough credit to young people. I really don't. I think that they are out there in a way that I may not understand and I may not be able to follow. But if you're on, for instance, Facebook, and you follow Alt National Park or Clergy Coaching Network or any of those, you'll see that there's a lot of young people who are resisting. And a resistance at this point, resisting can be smiling at somebody. Resisting can be holding a door open for somebody. Resisting can be saying to somebody, that's not okay. And when you're 16 years old, saying that's not okay to another 16-year-old, that's a big step. So I think we give them less credit than they deserve, really. I'm counting on them.
Yeah. No.
All right. Well, he's been waiting so patiently.
This is a little less global, but I've been like a fan since like I bought your very first album when I was in 8th grade, and have been, so, your album Present Company. It seems like that no one ever talks about that, and I don't think you covered it that much in your autobiography. But what's your feeling on that album? What was that like? Because to me, that's like a masterpiece. And when it went on CD, and you could play the whole thing in one run, because it was like one of the first concept albums I think that you did. They were the.
So for me as an artist, there are certain songs and certain albums that are transitional. you are growing, you know that you're moving towards something, but you're not there yet. For me, Present Company is a transitional album. It's the transition between the Society's Child era, if you will, that ended with Who Really Cares, and the beginning of Stars. Present Company is halfway between being a grown-up artist and halfway between still being a kid. I'm fond of it, but to me, as an artist only, it's not a great album. I mean, I think I'm very lucky to have a Between the Lines or a Light at the End of the Line or a Breaking Silence in my catalog, because I would match those against anybody's work. Whereas Present Company is a lot of discovering. It's a lot of searching. And as an artist, you find yourself periodically doing things that you know are not the right thing. They're not it. But you have to go through them to get to it. Because if you don't go through them, nobody can give that to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good question.
Final question.
In the film and in your life, I've noticed that you've met so many famous people, so many stars. What sort of insights did you feel that you got from people like Janis Joplin or Jimi Hendrix, and did you ever meet a Beatle?
I never met a Beatle, but Paul McCartney did ask for all my albums from MGM, so I thought that was pretty cool. You know, being famous, the great thing about being famous is that it gives you access. Like, it gives you access to other artists that you admire. And it lets you call, like, a Chick Corea and say, would you duet with me? I said to a very wealthy friend of mine who was thrilled that he had scored first-row seats to the Pete Seeger final concert tribute at Madison Square Garden, and he was bragging, and I said, well, the difference is you bought seats and I go to the stage door. And that's the difference. I will say about other artists that I've been very fortunate. I have never met a great artist who wasn't also humble, filled with curiosity, gracious, and giving. So, like, I learned to get up from a chair from Shelley Fabre on The Tonight Show. Lily Tomlin taught me how to hug so that it didn't look awkward. Janis, I don't think I learned anything from Janis other than that it was good to be as far as you could be and not let anybody tell you not to, because that was her ethic. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've met so many really great artists. I've been so lucky. The most meaningful moment to me was when I was really down and out in L.A., living in Santa Monica before it was trendy. And nobody wanted to live there. And I went to see Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Pass, just the two of them. And Ella had led my standing ovation at the Grammys, but that had been a long time before. And I hung around after the show. I mean, it was mesmerizing, just the two of them sitting there. I hung around thinking, well, maybe she'd sort of remember me if I say, you remember Janis Ian, I wrote at 17. And I finally got in because Grady Tate was playing with her, and he said, Miss Ella, there's a young woman here who wants to see you. I walked in, and she looked at me, and she said, Janis, where's my new album? And she enveloped me in this bear hug, and I clung to that for the next year because I kept telling myself every time Clive or somebody like him trampled on me, I would say, Ella Fitzgerald is waiting for my next album. And you can't beat that.
The last thing I want to say is that both Society's Child and At 17 have been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, which is a significant historical recording. So,
Cool.
yeah, very cool. All right, I want to thank Varda, Janis Ian for being here tonight. Thank all of you for being here.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.